Now we will start with the next topic, that is menstrual cycle. Menstrual cycle क्या है दोस्तों? What is menstrual cycle? अगर आपको menstrual cycle समझना है, first of all you should know what is a cycle. एक cycle क्या होता है दोस्तों? What is a cycle? Now see here, anything which goes from point A to point B, again it comes back to point A, and this keeps on repeating. तो एक कोई एक चीज है जो पॉइंट ए से पॉइंट बी जा रही है, फिर वो वापस पॉइंट ए पे आ रही है, और ये बार 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 होता रहेगा. इसी को हम कहते हैं साइकिल, राइट? दिस इज व्हाट इट इज कॉल्ड एज साइकिल. नाउ I think it goes from point A to point B, again it comes back to point A. This is one cycle, right? This is one cycle. For example, we have something called as water cycle. So what happens in water cycle दोस्तों? water cycle में क्या होता है दोस्तों? एक पॉन्ड होता है, पॉन्ड के अंदर पानी होता है, right? So now because of sunlight, the water will evaporate. It will go up and it will form clouds. Again from the clouds, when it rains, जब बारिश होती है तो ये पानी वापस आ जाएगा, right? So imagine if pond is point A and cloud is point B. Understood what is happening to the water? The water is going from point A to point B, again it is coming back to point A. So imagine कर लिए दोस्तों, एक वाटर ड्रॉपलेट है, वो पॉन्ड में है, वो पॉइंट ए पर है. So because of sunlight, this water droplet will evaporate, it will go into the clouds, that is point B. Again it will come back to the pond in the form of rain, right? So this water droplet, it went from point A to point B, again it came back to point A. So this is one cycle of the water droplet, and this cycle keeps on repeating, right? So a similar cycle happens in females of primates. तो जो females of primates है दोस्तों, इनके अंदर रिप्रोडक्शन को लेकर ऐसा ही एक सिमिलर साइकिल होता है, जिसको हम कहते हैं menstrual cycle. So in females of primates, there is a cycle related to reproduction. So reproduction को लेकर जो females of primates में जो cycle होता है, उसी को हम कहते हैं menstrual cycle. And this cycle, for one cycle to complete, it will take 1 month. So this cycle is called, therefore this cycle is called as menstrual cycle. So समझ में आया दोस्तों? तो menstrual cycle क्या है दोस्तों? रिप्रोडक्शन को लेकर, सिर्फ रिप्रोडक्शन को लेकर जो फीमेल्स ऑफ प्राइमेट्स के अंदर जो साइकिल होता है, उसी को हम कहते हैं menstrual cycle. And this cycle will take 1 month. For one cycle to complete, it will take 1 month. मैं आपको एक एग्जांपल देता हूं ताकि आप लोगों को समझ में आए. So this is a ovary of a female. In ovary, we all know there are primary follicles, right? So this is a primary follicle. So first में क्या होता है? Primary follicle होता है. So then at the time of oogenesis, this primary follicle will develop into secondary follicle. Right? So primary follicle will develop into secondary follicle. This secondary follicle will develop into tertiary follicle. Tertiary follicle will develop into Graafian follicle, right? Graafian follicle. Now this Graafian follicle will rupture and it will release the ovum outside the ovary. This is called as ovulation. और बचा हुआ जो Graafian follicle है दोस्तों, it will become corpus luteum. Understood? Now if there is no fertilization of the ovum, जो ovum release हुआ है, अगर वो ovum fertilize नहीं हुआ, what will happen? This corpus luteum will degenerate. Corpus luteum will die. Now what happens? Again a new cycle will start. Again a primary follicle will develop to secondary follicle. Again a secondary follicle will develop to tertiary follicle. From tertiary follicle to Graafian follicle to corpus luteum. फिर से अगर fertilization नहीं हुआ, फिर से primary follicle. So आप देख सकते हैं ओवरी में एक साइकिल हो रहा है, राइट? सो ये साइकिल कहां से शुरू हुआ? दिस साइकिल स्टार्टेड फ्रॉम प्राइमरी फॉलिकल, देन इट वेंट इनटू ग्राफियन फॉलिकल, देन इट वेंट इनटू कॉर्पस लूटियम, राइट? अगर फर्टिलाइजेशन नहीं हुआ, अगेन इट विल कम बैक टू न्यू प्राइमरी फॉलिकल. सो आप देख सकते हैं रिप्रोडक्शन को लेकर मैं डाइजेशन की बात नहीं कर रहा हूं, मैं सर्कुलेशन की बात नहीं कर रहा हूं, मैं रेस्पिरेशन की बात नहीं कर रहा हूं, मैं बात कर रहा हूं रिप्रोडक्शन को लेकर। सो रिप्रोडक्शन को लेकर जो फीमेल प्राइमेट्स के अंदर जो साइक्लिकल चेंजेस होते हैं, और ये साइक्लिकल चेंजेस कंप्लीट होने के लिए 1 मंथ लेते हैं, that is why it is called as menstrual cycle, or you can also called as monthly cycle. So this is an example. तो आप देख सकते हैं, सो रिप्रोडक्शन को लेकर ओवरी के अंदर एक साइकिल हो रहा है, और वो साइकिल क्या है? प्राइमरी फॉलिकल से लेके ग्राफियन फॉलिकल, ग्राफियन फॉलिकल से लेके कॉर्पस लुटियम, अगर फर्टिलाइजेशन नहीं हुआ अगेन इट विल कम बैक टू प्राइमरी फॉलिकल. सो दिस इज अ साइक्लिकल चेंज हैपनिंग इन द ओवरी. It is beautiful, right? Similar cyclical changes will happen in endometrium. Similar cyclical changes will happen in estrogen, progesterone, FSH, LH. समझ में आ रहा है दोस्तों? So menstrual cycle, now we will come back to the definition. So what is menstrual cycle? What is menstrual cycle? So cyclical changes related to reproduction in females of primates. In females of primates, this is called as menstrual cycle. ये menstrual word क्यों लगा है? Because it will, this cycle, for one cycle to complete it will take 1 month. That is why इसके बाजू हमने menstrual नाम लगा दिया. Now there is one more word called as menstruation. There is one more word that is called as menstruation. What is menstruation? So आपने देखा होगा दोस्तों, females they bleed every month. For 3 to 8 days they will bleed. Every month they will bleed. So this bleeding is called as menstruation. Understood? So जो shedded endometrium है, it will, and the blood will come out through the vagina, right? So this bleeding is called as menstruation. Understood? So now we will study how this menstrual cycle will happen, and where and all this menstrual cycle will happen. तो menstrual cycle यानी कि ये cyclical जो changes हैं, ये जो साइक्लिकल चेंजेस है ये कहां कहां पर होते हैं? रिप्रोडक्शन को लेकर जो साइक्लिकल चेंजेस है फीमेल्स के अंदर, वो कहां कहां पर होते हैं? फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, दिस साइक्लिकल चेंजेस विल हैपन इन दी हार्मोन्स. कौन से हार्मोन्स है दोस्तों? कौन से हार्मोन्स है? वी नो दिस साइक्लिकल चेंजेस विल हैपन इन एफएसएच, एलएच. ये दोनों को मिलाकर हम कहते हैं गोनाडोट्रोपिन्स, राइट? गोनाडोट्रोपिन्स, एंड दे आर रिलीज फ्रॉम पिट्यूटरी ग्लैंड. सो these are also called as pituitary hormones, right? Pituitary hormones. Then the cyclical changes will happen in estrogen. Then the cyclical changes will happen in progesterone. कैसे होता है मैं आपको समझाऊंगा, पहले आप देखिए कहां कहां पर cyclical changes होते हैं. Then their cyclical changes will happen in ovary. Cyclical changes will happen in ovary. Already मैंने वो क्या changes है मैंने आपको बताया. Then the cyclical changes will happen in the endometrium. Understood? So there is a cyclical change in all these structures. These structures are all the hormones, ovary and endometrium. They are all involved in what? Reproduction. They are all involved in reproduction, and they show cyclical changes. So these cyclical changes are called as menstrual cycle. Okay, now how this menstrual cycle will happen? We will understand. Okay, now see here. For a menstrual cycle to complete, generally it will take 1 month, that is 28 to 29 days. So the first menstrual cycle which will happen at the puberty के टाइम पे जो पहला menstrual cycle होता है दोस्तों, उसको हम कहते हैं menarche. So what is menarche? The first menstruation begins at puberty, which is called as menarche. Then this menstruation will cease at the age of 50 years. Around the age of 50 years, this menstruation will stop, and that is called as menopause. Understood? Now see here. In human females, the menstruation is repeated at an average of interval of 28 to 29 days. So in human females के अंदर दोस्तों, the menstrual cycle, for one cycle to complete, average it will take from 28 to 29 days. Understood? Okay. Now, how this menstruation will start at menarche? How this menstruation will start at menarche? So let me change the, okay. So this is day 0. This is day 28 or 29. We will take as 29 days. Okay. So we will take a cycle of 29 days. Now we will understand the complete cycle. Then we will go back and we will study the graph which is given in your NCERT. Okay. So when the female reaches puberty, जब एक female puberty को reach करती है, what will happen? Her hypothalamus, her hypothalamus will secrete GnRH. Will secrete GnRH. This GnRH, what it will do? It will stimulate anterior pituitary gland. It will stimulate the anterior pituitary gland. Sorry, anterior pituitary gland. So it will stimulate the anterior pituitary gland. Then anterior pituitary gland will secrete FSH. Will secrete FSH. Now what will happen? What this FSH will do? What this FSH will do? इसका नाम ही है दोस्तों. What is the full form of FSH? It is follicle stimulating hormone, right? So it will stimulate the follicles. So follicle stimulating hormone. So what will happen? Now see here. Now what will happen? This is day 0. This is day 28. So what will happen on day 0? On day 0, hypothalamus is releasing GnRH. GnRH will act on anterior pituitary gland. Anterior pituitary gland is releasing FSH. Now what this FSH will do? It will do two things. The first thing it will do is it will stimulate the follicle. तो जब ये follicle को stimulate करेगा तो क्या होगा दोस्तों? क्या होगा? So this is your primary follicle. This is your primary follicle. When it will stimulate the follicle, the primary follicle will develop to secondary follicle. Secondary follicle will develop to tertiary follicle. Then it will develop to Graafian follicle. Graafian follicle. So पहला काम FSH क्या करता है दोस्तों? FSH will stimulate the follicles, which will lead to development of follicles. So FSH will lead to development of follicles. So it will lead to development of follicles. So development of follicles. What will happen when the follicles will develop? From primary follicle, it will become secondary, from secondary to tertiary, and from tertiary to Graafian follicle. Then this FSH will stimulate the granulosa cells of follicles, of primary follicle. जो primary follicle है दोस्तों, we all know what is a primary follicle. Primary follicle क्या है? Primary follicle के अंदर center में primary oocyte होता है, and around the primary oocyte there are layers of granulosa cells. So this FSH will stimulate the granulosa cells, and these granulosa cells will release estrogen. So what is happening on day 0? FSH is coming. FSH is stimulating the follicles. It is stimulating the follicles, जिसकी वजह से क्या हो रहा है? The follicles are developing. और FSH क्या कर रहा है? FSH is stimulating the granulosa cells and it is releasing the estrogen. Now what will happen? This estrogen has negative feedback on FSH. ये estrogen क्या है? It will have a negative feedback on FSH and it will decrease the synthesis and release of FSH. But there is one more function of estrogen. The second function of estrogen is this estrogen will cause proliferation of endometrium. So क्या होगा दोस्तों? Now we will draw endometrium here. Now we will draw the endometrium here and we will understand. So this FSH will cause proliferation of endometrium. Proliferation का मतलब क्या है? It will cause growth and development of endometrium. It will increase the thickness of endometrium. The estrogen will cause the endometrial cells to replicate. That is called as proliferation. So endometrium will proliferate and the thickness of endometrium will increase. So आप देख सकते हैं कि thickness of endometrium is increasing. Right? So this is the second function what endometrium will do. Sorry, estrogen will do. The estrogen also has third function. What is the third function? This estrogen will bring LH surge. When estrogen reaches its peak, it stimulates the release of LH. Estrogen क्या करेगा दोस्तों? It has a negative feedback on FSH, but it will has a positive feedback on LH, जिसकी वजह से क्या होगा, this estrogen will lead to LH surge. So here there will be LH surge. So here there will be LH surge. यहाँ पे LH surge होगा. अंडरस्टूड? यहां तक आपको स्टोरी समझ में आई या नहीं? समझ में आई या नहीं? सो एक काम करते हैं, मैं फिर से आपको स्टोरी समझाता हूं. ये फिर से मैं आपको स्टोरी समझाता हूं. सो दिस इज डे 0. दिस इज डे 0 एंड द साइकिल लास्ट फॉर लाइक 28 days. 28 days. तो डे 0 में क्या हो रहा है? डे 0 में और एट द टाइम ऑफ प्यूबर्टी व्हाट विल हैपन? हाइपोथैलेमस hypothalamus hypothalamus will release GnRH. This GnRH will act on anterior pituitary gland. AP का मतलब anterior pituitary gland, and this anterior pituitary gland will release FSH, right? This anterior pituitary gland will release FSH. Now this FSH, what it will do? It will do two important functions. First important function, it will stimulate the follicles, जिसकी वजह से क्या होगा दोस्तों? There will be development of follicles. Development of follicles. So development कैसे होगा? So this is your primary follicle. So primary follicle will become secondary follicle. Secondary will become tertiary follicle. Tertiary will become Graafian follicle. The second function of FSH क्या है दोस्तों? It will stimulate the granulosa cells. Granulosa cells. So this granulosa cells will release estrogen. Now there are three important functions of estrogen. What are those three important functions? First of all, it has a negative feedback on FSH. Then second thing, it will proliferate the endometrium, जिसकी वजह से क्या होगा? There will be increase in the thickness of endometrium. So endometrium का thickness increase होता जाएगा. Understood? So the endometrial thickness will keep on increasing. The third function, what this estrogen will do? The third function, very important function, it brings LH surge. So when this this brings LH surge. Now what this LH surge will do? This LH hormone will cause ovulation. जिसकी वजह से क्या होगा दोस्तों? The Graafian follicle will rupture. And it will release ovum. So because of LH surge, there is ovulation. Because of ovulation, this Graafian follicle will rupture and it will release ovum. So बचा हुआ Graafian follicle क्या बनेगा दोस्तों? बचा हुआ Graafian follicle will become corpus luteum. It will become what? Corpus luteum. So I will draw like this. So this is your corpus luteum. Understood? जो मैंने cloud draw किया, that is your corpus luteum. So because of LH surge, there will be ovulation, and because of ovulation, the Graafian follicle will rupture. The Graafian follicle, GF का मतलब है Graafian follicle will rupture, and it will release what? And releases ovum. Ovum को release कर देगा. बचा हुआ corpus luteum Graafian follicle क्या बनेगा? The remaining Graafian follicle will become corpus luteum. अब ये कार्पस लूटियम जो है दोस्तों, इसके दो इंपॉर्टेंट फंक्शंस हैं. पहला इंपॉर्टेंट फंक्शन है, इट विल रिलीज एस्ट्रोजन. दिस कार्पस लूटियम विल आल्सो रिलीज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट हार्मोन, दैट इज प्रोजेस्टेरॉन. अब ये जो प्रोजेस्टेरॉन है दोस्तों, दिस प्रोजेस्टेरॉन हैज टू इंपॉर्टेंट फंक्शंस. और ये LH जो है, इवन LH हार्मोन हैज टू इंपॉर्टेंट फंक्शन. एक फंक्शन क्या था दोस्तों LH का? व्हाट इज वन फंक्शन ऑफ LH? LH का एक फंक्शन था, इट विल ब्रिंग अबाउट ओव्यूलेशन. दूसरा फंक्शन क्या है दोस्तों? LH का? LH का फुल फॉर्म क्या है? LH का फुल फॉर्म है ल्यूटिनाइजिंग हार्मोन. सो देयर इज समथिंग कॉल्ड एज ल्यूटिनाइजिंग. कार्पस लूटियम के जो वर्ड है उसमें भी लूटियम है. सो कार्पस लूटियम has luteum and luteinizing hormone. LH has luteinizing hormone. Means what? LH will protect the corpus luteum, and this LH will prevent the degeneration of डीजेनरेशन ऑफ कॉर्पस लूटियम, कॉर्पस लूटियम। तो याद रखे दोस्तों, तो एलएच के दो इंपॉर्टेंट फंक्शंस हैं। पहला इंपॉर्टेंट फंक्शन क्या है? एलएच सर्च विल ब्रिंग, एलएच सर्च विल ब्रिंग ओव्यूलेशन। और दूसरा इंपॉर्टेंट फंक्शन क्या है दोस्तों? एलएच विल प्रोटेक्ट कॉर्पस लूटियम, LH hormone will protect corpus luteum. So this corpus luteum here, this corpus luteum here, it is protected by LH. So it is protected by LH. Understood? Now this corpus luteum will release two hormones, estrogen and progesterone. Now this progesterone has two important functions. The first function is called as secretory function. What is this secretory function? See, ईस्ट्रोजन विल ब्रिंग प्रोलिफरेशन ऑफ एंडोमेट्रियम, यानी कि ईस्ट्रोजन क्या करेगा? इट विल इंक्रीज द थिकनेस ऑफ एंडोमेट्रियम। अगर कोई एक, फॉर एग्जांपल दोस्तों, आप एग्जांपल लीजिए, आई टेक क्यूब्स एंड आई स्टार्ट बिल्डिंग अ बिग बिल्डिंग ऑफ क्यूब्स। मैं क्या करूंगा? ब्रिक्स, ईंटें, ब्रिक्स, आई विल टेक सम ब्रिक्स एंड आई विल स्टार्ट अरेंजिंग द ब्रिक्स on top of each other. What will happen? After a certain time, the bricks or the cubes will fall, the tower will fall. Why? Because there is no one to hold. So estrogen, it will increase the thickness of endometrium, but there should be someone to hold that endometrium. So there should be some cement to hold that endometrium, and that cement is progesterone. So progesterone has secretory function, means what? It acts as a cement to endometrium, एंडोमेट्रियम। सो ये प्रोजेस्टेरॉन जो है दोस्तों, ये सीमेंट का काम करता है। अंडरस्टूड? सो दिस प्रोजेस्टेरॉन हैज अ सीमेंटिंग फंक्शन ऑफ एंडोमेट्रियम। सो ये एंडोमेट्रियम को पकड़ के रखेगा प्रोजेस्टेरॉन। एंड the second important function of endometrium is it has a negative feedback on LH. It has negative feedback on LH. Progesterone has negative feedback on LH. जिसकी वजह से क्या होगा दोस्तों? जिसकी वजह से क्या होगा? There will be decreased synthesis of LH, right? There will be decreased synthesis of LH. अगर LH का synthesis decrease हो गया, corpus luteum को कोई बचा सकता है? नहीं. Corpus luteum will degenerate. If corpus luteum will degenerate, there will be no progesterone. If there is no progesterone, there is no cement for endometrium, and the endometrium will fall. ये कब होता है? When there is no fertilization. अगर fertilization नहीं हुआ, endometrium will fall. Understood? Understood the whole story? Understood? We will revise it again. Once, if we revise, it is very good so that we can understand. So what will happen? So this is day 0 and this is day 28. So on day 0, FS from anterior pituitary gland, FSH will come. FSH will stimulate the follicles, right? Stimulate the follicles. जिसकी वजह से क्या होगा दोस्तों? Primary follicle will develop to secondary follicle. Better is to draw the diagram so that you can understand, right? So this primary follicle will develop to secondary follicle will develop to tertiary, and tertiary will develop to Graafian follicle. Now this FSH will bring release of, it will act on granulosa cells, of the follicles, and it will stimulate the granulosa cells. These granulosa cells will release estrogen. Now this estrogen has an important function, that it has a negative feedback on FSH. This estrogen will proliferate the endometrium, जिसकी वजह से क्या होगा? एंडोमेट्रियम का थिकनेस बढ़ेगा, ऐसे 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 करके. So there will be increase in the thickness of endometrium, right? Then what will happen? This estrogen will bring LH surge. What will LH surge do? LH surge will bring ovulation. So when ovulation will happen, this Graafian follicle will rupture and it will release the ovum. And the remaining Graafian follicle will become corpus luteum. So after ovulation, what will happen? Graafian follicle will become corpus luteum. Cl का मतलब है corpus luteum. Now this corpus luteum, it is protected by LH. It is protected This corpus luteum, it is protected by LH. So LH hormone is protecting the corpus luteum. Now what this corpus luteum will do, it will release two things. One is it will release estrogen, second it will release progesterone. It will release progesterone. What this progesterone will do, this progesterone has a negative feedback on LH and it will bring secretory function. It will act as a cement and hold the endometrium. होल्ड द एंडोमेट्रियम. यहां तक हमने स्टोरी पढ़ लिया. सो अगर फर्टिलाइजेशन नहीं हुआ, if there is no fertilization, what will happen? Because progesterone is inhibiting the LH नहीं है, the amount of LH will decrease, जिसकी वजह से corpus luteum will die. Because the corpus luteum will die, there will be no release of progesterone. Because there is no release of progesterone, there is no cement to hold the endometrium, and the endometrium will what? It will collapse. ये कब होगा? When there is no fertilization of the ovum, right? So after ovulation there will be ovum. So here, one second. So here after ovulation there is ovum, right? अगर ovum का fertilization नहीं हुआ, no fertilization, if there is no fertilization of the ovum, what will happen? The corpus luteum will die. Because क्यों? Because progesterone is inhibiting LH. progesterone अपनी खुद की खबर खोद रहा है. It is inhibiting LH, जिसकी वजह से corpus luteum there will be decreased amount of LH. There will be no one to protect the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum will degenerate, and if the corpus luteum will degenerate, there will be no progesterone. If there is no progesterone, there is no cement to hold the endometrium, and the endometrium will collapse. Right? अगर fertilization हो गया, if there is fertilization of the ovum, what will happen? After fertilization there will be formation of zygote. So after fertilization, अगर fertilization हो गया, अगर fertilization हो गया, so अगर fertilization हो गया तो क्या होगा? If ovum is fertilized, what will happen? There will be formation of zygote. This zygote will become embryo. This embryo will go and it will have implantation in the endometrium. It will implant in endometrium, right? It will implant in endometrium, and there will be development of placenta. कैसे डेवलप होगा आगे के लेक्चर्स में मैं पढ़ाऊंगा, अभी आप ये समझिए. नाउ दिस प्लासेंटा विल रिलीज HCG. नाउ दिस HCG ह्यूमन कोरियानिक गोनाडोट्रोपिन, दिस हैज सेम फंक्शन एज LH. इसका जो फंक्शन है दोस्तों, इट इज सिमिलर एज LH. सो दिस HCG will protect the corpus luteum. Cl का मतलब है corpus luteum. So this will protect the corpus luteum. So this HCG will protect the corpus luteum. So दोस्तों अगर fertilization हुआ तो क्या होगा? After fertilization there will be formation of zygote. Then this zygote will become embryo. The embryo will implant in the endometrium. Then there will be development of placenta. Then this placenta will release HCG, which will protect the corpus luteum. Right? So if this corpus luteum is protected, this corpus luteum will keep on releasing progesterone, and if it keeps on releasing the progesterone, there will be there is cement. So there is continuous cement for the endometrium. So this progesterone, it will keep on acting as a cement on endometrium, and the endometrium will not fall. So अगर fertilization हुआ, so क्या होगा? Bleeding नहीं होगी. क्यों bleeding नहीं होगी? Because of this thing. So this progesterone will act as a cement, and it will act as a cement on endometrium. So the endometrium will not fall. Endometrium नहीं गिरेगा. Now it is very important. अगर fertilization के बाद endometrium shed हो गया, where will the embryo implant? So that is why progesterone is holding the endometrium, so that the embryo can implant and the fetus can develop in the endometrium. अगर progesterone गया, this endometrium will fall and all the fetus will come out. Right? At the time of delivery यही होता है दोस्तों. डिलीवरी के टाइम पे क्या होता है? There will be functional withdrawal of progesterone. फंक्शनल विथड्रॉवल ऑफ प्रोजेस्टेरॉन, जिसकी वजह से प्रोजेस्टेरॉन काम नहीं करेगा और क्या होगा? बेबी के साथ एंडोमेट्रियम सारा बाहर आ जाएगा। सो देखो प्रोजेस्टेरॉन क्या कर रहा है, एंडोमेट्रियम को पकड़ के रख रहा है। क्यों पकड़ के रख रहा है? ताकि एम्ब्रियो इम्प्लांट हो। लेकिन अगर फर्टिलाइजेशन ही नहीं हुआ, अगर ओवम फर्टिलाइज ही नहीं हुआ, समझ में आ रहा है? अगर ओवम फर्टिलाइज ही नहीं हुआ, अगर जाइगोट ही नहीं बना, एम्ब्रियो ही नहीं बना, तो इम्प्लांटेशन का कोई सवाल ही नहीं है। That is why what will happen if there is no ovulation? If there is no ovulation, what will happen? There will be no HCG. So that is why the corpus luteum will degenerate and जिसकी वजह से क्या होगा? There will be no progesterone. जिसकी वजह से क्या होगा? There will be no cement for the endometrium and endometrium will fall. Endometrium will fall. Now we will complete this diagram. So if there is a cycle of 28 days, the ovulation will happen on the 14th day. तो 14th डे के दिन ओव्यूलेशन होगा. सो आफ्टर ओव्यूलेशन व्हाट विल हैपन? कॉर्पस लूटियम विल डेवलप. दिस कॉर्पस लूटियम विल सेक्रेट प्रोजेस्टेरॉन, जिसकी वजह से क्या होगा? एंडोमेट्रियम, द थिकनेस ऑफ द एंडोमेट्रियम इज मेंटेन्ड बाय द प्रोजेस्टेरॉन. द थिकनेस ऑफ द एंडोमेट्रियम इज मेंटेन्ड बाय द प्रोजेस्टेरॉन. अंडरस्टूड? इफ देयर इज नो फर्टिलाइजेशन ऑफ द ओवम, अगर ओवम का फर्टिलाइजेशन नहीं हुआ, अगर ओवम का फर्टिलाइजेशन नहीं हुआ, what will happen? Even corpus luteum will also die. If corpus luteum will die, progesterone will not be there and there will be no one for cementing the endometrium. There will be no cement for the endometrium and endometrium will degenerate and endometrium will fall. The layer will fall and it will come out. समझ में आया दोस्तों? This is a whole story. So आप देख सकते हैं कि follicles inside the ovary there is a cycle. Right? In endometrium there is a cycle. What is the cycle? Endometrium पहले क्या होगा? Endometrium will be thin. First there will be thin endometrium. Then because of estrogen, this endometrium will proliferate. It will become thick and it will remain thick till the progesterone is there. If there is no progesterone, again the endometrium will fall. Again the endometrial layer will become thin. So आप देख सकते हैं endometrium का भी क्या हो रहा है? एक cycle हो रहा है. And for one cycle, it will take 1 month. It will take 1 month and this keeps on repeating. This keeps on repeating. Right? समझ में आया दोस्तों? समझ में आया कॉर्पस लूटियम क्या है, प्रोजेस्टेरॉन क्या है? Now see here. Now we will go back to the one of the graphs given in your NCERT. NCERT में जो ग्राफ्स दिए इसके हम जाएंगे. ओके, इससे पहले मैं आपको पढ़ा देता हूं. यहां पे देखें ओव्यूलेशन कहां पे हो रहा है? When is ovulation happening? Ovulation is happening on the 14th day, right here. ये जो मैंने रेड लाइन डाला है, ovulation is happening on the 14th day. So before 14th day सारी स्टोरी जो है वो फॉलिकल्स की है. Right? The follicles are developing. Primary follicle is becoming secondary is becoming tertiary is becoming Graafian follicle. So the whole story is about follicles. That is why this phase is called as follicular phase. This phase is called as follicular phase. Understood? Or before 14th day, what is happening? There is proliferation of endometrium. That is why it is also called as proliferative phase. तो इसके दो नाम है दोस्तों. So before 14th day, the menstrual, so before ovulation, the better word to use is before ovulation. यहाँ पे before ovulation what will happen? The follicles will develop. Ovulation होता ही जब follicles develop होने के बाद ही ovulation होता है. So before ovulation, there is development of follicles. That is why this period is called as follicular phase. And before ovulation, there is proliferation of endometrium. That is why it is also called as proliferative phase. After ovulation, what is happening? अब यहाँ पे स्टोरी किसकी है? यहाँ पे स्टोरी है कॉर्पस लूटियम की. So after ovulation, corpus luteum की स्टोरी है. That is why this phase is called as luteal phase. This phase is called as luteal phase. और यहाँ पे क्या हो रहा है? एंडोमेट्रियम का सेक्रेटरी फंक्शन हो रहा है. प्रोलिफरेशन पहले हुआ, राइट? आफ्टर ओव्यूलेशन देयर इज the progesterone is acting like a cement to the endometrium, which is called as secretory function. So this phase is also called as secretory phase. तो आप देख सकते हैं दोस्तों, अगर एंडोमेट्रियम, इफ यू कंसीडर एंडोमेट्रियम, सो बिफोर ओव्यूलेशन द साइकिल इज कॉल्ड एज proliferative phase because the endometrium is proliferating. After ovulation it is called as secretory phase because there is secretory function on the endometrium, राइट। अगर आप फॉलिकल्स को लेकर बात करेंगे, सो बिफोर ओव्यूलेशन द साइकिल इज कॉल्ड, द फेज इज कॉल्ड एज व्हाट? Follicular phase. After ovulation it is called as luteal phase. Luteal phase. Now we will go back to this graph, very important graph, and we will understand. We will understand. So now in this graph what you can see, first you can see pituitary hormones, और इसमें दो pituitary hormones है, एक है FSH and one is LH. Then इसके नीचे क्या है? There is ovarian events. Ovarian events में क्या हो रहा है आप देख सकते हैं, primary follicle है, then this primary follicle is developing to secondary, then this is developing to tertiary, and then it is developing to Graafian follicle, then there is ovulation. So after ovulation this is becoming corpus luteum. Zuban bhai, corpus luteum, and you can see the corpus luteum is decreasing in the size, right? Then here you can see ovarian hormones. Ovarian hormones, there is estrogen, there is progesterone, and then finally you can see the endometrium. So you can see this is the thickness of endometrium, right? Now we will understand the menstrual cycle in this diagram. तो पहले मैंने क्या बोला था दोस्तों, फर्स्ट देयर विल बी FSH. तो आप देख सकते हैं इनिशियली द लेवल्स ऑफ FSH आर हाई. So what will FSH do? What will FSH do? This FSH has two functions. FSH has two functions. First, it will stimulate the follicles. Because of FSH, there will be stimulation of follicles, right? So because of stimulation, the follicles will develop. So there will be development of follicles. Development of follicles, right? Then this FSH will stimulate granulosa cells, and granulosa cells will release estrogen. So आप देख सकते हैं, so this is FSH. So आप देख सकते हैं, this is FSH. So this is the levels of FSH. Initially the levels of FSH are high. Then this FSH, you can see because of FSH the follicles are developing. The follicles are developing from primary to secondary, secondary to tertiary, tertiary to Graafian follicle. Then because of FSH, you can see the levels of estrogen are rising. So you can see the level of estrogen is rising here, right? So level of estrogen is rising. Now what this estrogen will do? ये estrogen क्या करेगा दोस्तों? First of all, it will have negative feedback on FSH. Sorry. So this estrogen will have negative feedback on FSH, and this estrogen will cause proliferation of endometrium. Proliferation of endometrium. So you can see the thickness of endometrium is increasing here. You can see slowly the thickness of endometrium is increasing. Why? Because जहां पे estrogen rise हो रहा है, so you can see as the estrogen is rising, you can see the thickness of endometrium is also increasing, right? So first what will happen? There will be FSH. There will be FSH. This FSH will stimulate the follicles. The follicles will develop from primary to secondary, secondary to tertiary, tertiary to Graafian. Now this FSH will also stimulate the synthesis of estrogen. जिसकी वजह से क्या होगा? The estrogen levels will rise. The estrogen levels will rise, right? Because the estrogen levels are rising, there is what? Proliferation of endometrium. Now this estrogen will also bring what? I told you it will bring LH surge. तो आप देख सकते हैं दोस्तों, आप देख सकते हैं, so after there is, when the estrogen will peak, so after some hours even the LH hormone, this is the LH hormone, the LH hormone will also peak. So आप देख सकते हैं जैसे जैसे estrogen ने peak किया, so after the estrogen will reach its peak, so you can see the LH will also reach, there is LH surge. There is LH surge, and when there is LH surge, you can see there is ovulation here. So you can see when there is LH surge here, there is ovulation here. Ovulation is happening. So when ovulation is happening, you can see the ovum. So this is the ovum. The ovum is released. This is the ovum. This ovum is released, and this is the remaining Graafian follicle. This remaining Graafian follicle will become corpus luteum, right? Right? So when there is LH surge, what will happen? When there is LH surge, there will be ovulation. After ovulation, what will happen? So ovum will be released, and remaining Graafian follicle will become what? Corpus luteum. GF will become Cl. Now this corpus luteum will secrete two important hormones, E for estrogen and P for progesterone, right? So you can see when there is corpus luteum here, so यहाँ पे corpus luteum है, you can see the level of progesterone. So this red color is the level of progesterone. The level of progesterone is rising, as well as the level of estrogen is also rising. So progesterone और estrogen दोनों rise हो रहे हैं. right? Now what will happen? Actually this corpus luteum is protected by LH. This corpus luteum is protected by LH. LH is one protecting this corpus luteum. So if there is no, अगर there is no ovulation, अगर ovulation नहीं होगा, what will happen? This corpus luteum will degenerate. You can see the corpus luteum is degenerating. So once there is degeneration of corpus luteum, you can see the level of progesterone is falling. You can see the progesterone is falling. So when the progesterone will fall, now there is no one to hold the endometrium. There is no one to hold the thick endometrium. So what will happen? You can see even the endometrium will fall. तो आप देख सकते हैं यहाँ पे बुक में एक ब्लड ऐसे ब्लड दिखाया गया. It means what? The endometrium will fall and there will be bleeding. There will be bleeding. That is called as what? Menstruation. So before ovulation, we can see there is development of follicles. That is why this is called as follicular phase. And after ovulation, the story is about corpus luteum. That is why it is called as luteal phase. When you look at the endometrium, you can see before ovulation there is proliferation of endometrium. That is why it is called as proliferative phase. And after ovulation, there is cementing of endometrium. That is called as secretory function on endometrium. It is called as secretory phase. Understood? Did you understand the whole story? So if there is no ovulation, there will be no if there is no ovulation, there is no one to protect the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum will degenerate. Now there will be no progesterone. That is why the endometrium will fall. Endometrium will degenerate and it will fall. So आप देख सकते हैं यहाँ पे आप देख सकते हैं एक ब्लड, यहाँ पे एक ब्लड का ये दिखाया गया है आपकी टेक्स्ट बुक में. You can see this blood which is coming out. This is the degeneration of endometrium. So again the thickness of endometrium will come down. अंडरस्टूड. सो पहले क्या था? FSH आया, FSH ने फॉलिकल्स को स्टिमुलेट किया, एज वेल एज इट इंक्रीज द लेवल्स ऑफ ईस्ट्रोजन. व्हेन द लेवल्स ऑफ ईस्ट्रोजन विल इंक्रीज, द थिकनेस ऑफ एंडोमेट्रियम विल इंक्रीज, एज वेल एज देयर विल बी LH सर्ज. So estrogen has positive feedback and LH positive effect. It will stimulate the release of LH, so there will be LH surge. जब LH surge होगा तो क्या होगा? There will be ovulation. So आप देख सकते हैं कि जब LH surge हो रहा है, so after 24 hours of after some time after LH surge there is ovulation. So after ovulation the remaining Graafian follicle will become corpus luteum. Now this corpus luteum, it will release progesterone. That is why the levels of progesterone are increasing, and this corpus luteum will also release estrogen, and again the levels of estrogen will increase. If there is no ovulation, the corpus luteum will degenerate because there is no one to protect corpus luteum. Why? Because जो LH protect कर रहा था corpus luteum को, this progesterone is decreasing the levels of LH. So you can see the levels of LH are coming down. So when the levels of LH will come down, the corpus luteum will die. When the corpus luteum will die, there will be no progesterone. If there is no progesterone, there is no one to hold the endometrium, and the endometrium will fall down. Understood? Now what happens? Now see here. I will remove all of these things. I hope. Now see here. At the end of the cycle, what is happening? Estrogen is also falling, right? Estrogen is also falling because if the corpus luteum will degenerate, there is no one to release estrogen. So estrogen का level भी नीचे आ जाएगा. When there is no estrogen, no estrogen का मतलब है there is low levels of estrogen. At the end of the cycle, you can see there are low levels of estrogen. When there are low levels of estrogen, there is no negative feedback on FSH, or there is less negative feedback on FSH. So there is less negative feedback on FSH. Now what will happen? Again the FSH will increase. Again new cycle will start. Again the FSH will increase. Again the same story will continue. This FSH will increase. This FSH will stimulate the follicles. This FSH will release estrogen. Then this estrogen will cause proliferation of the endometrium, and this estrogen will bring about what? LH surge. There will be LH surge. Because of LH surge, there will be ovulation. Because of after ovulation, the Graafian follicle will become corpus luteum. This corpus luteum will secrete what? It will secrete progesterone and estrogen. Right? Now this progesterone will bring secretory function, and this progesterone has negative feedback and LH. So if there is no ovulation, if there is no fertilization, there will be no one to protect the corpus luteum. Agar fertilization hua, I already told you the story, there will be HCG to protect the corpus luteum, but there is no one to protect the corpus luteum. That is why the corpus luteum will degenerate, and there will be decrease in progesterone levels, and there will be no one to hold the endometrium. The endometrium will fall. Because corpus luteum is dying, estrogen levels will also fall. There will be no estrogen. So at the end of the cycle, you can see here, there are low levels of estrogen. So if there are low levels of estrogen, there is less negative feedback on what? FSH. Again, there will be increase in FSH. The same story keeps on repeating every month between menarche to menopause. So menarche or menopause ke beech mein har mahina this cycle keeps on repeating. And you can see the cyclical changes are happening between pituitary hormones, estrogen, progesterone, then in the ovaries, and it is happening in the endometrium. Right? You can also see follicular phase and luteal phase. Understood? Now, very important thing you should remember in this cycle is, now see here, in this cycle you can see here, so till here, this is the 29th day, means one cycle has completed. So you can see, then when there is a bleeding, जब bleeding start हो रही है, so यहाँ पे bleeding start हो रही है, right? So this is the starting point of bleeding. So starting of bleeding marks beginning of new cycle. Means what दोस्तों? Women's, they bleed for 3 to 5 days or 3 to 8 days, right? So when they bleed on the first day, जब वो पहला दिन bleed करेंगे, that is new cycle has begun on that day. So जब नया cycle शुरू होगा, पुराना endometrium गिर जाएगा, right? So at the starting of the new cycle, the old endometrium will fall. The endometrium which was made in the previous cycle, it will fall. So यहाँ पे ये important समझना है, जिस दिन bleeding होगी, that is the marking of beginning of new cycle. जिस दिन bleeding होगी, इसका मतलब है उस दिन नया cycle शुरू हो गया. So when the progesterone will fall, and when the because progesterone is falling, there is no one to hold the endometrium will also fall, and there will be bleeding, and this bleeding, जब bleeding होगी, इसका मतलब है नया cycle शुरू हो गया. जिस दिन bleeding होगी, उस दिन नया cycle शुरू हो गया. Understood? So the day on which there is bleeding, पहली बार मतलब पहला दिन जिस दिन bleeding होगा, उस दिन नया cycle शुरू हो गया है. So this is the whole story of endometrium. So understood? So now we will read the slides ताकि आप लोगों को जो है slides भी समझ में आ सके. We will read the slides. At an average, now see here, in human females, the menstrual cycle, it is for average about 28 to 29 days. ये average है दोस्तों, right? Now see here, very important things you have to remember. You can see the cycle of the events, यानी कि सारे events का जो cycle है, it starts, कब शुरू होता है? Starting from the one menstruation till next. Means what? जिस दिन menstruation होगा, जिस दिन bleeding होगा, इसका मतलब है वहां से नया cycle शुरू हो गया है. For example, you are a doctor sitting in the OPD, a female will come to you and she will tell you what she will tell, कि मैंने 1st जनवरी से लेकर 5th जनवरी तक मेरा bleeding हुआ. She will tell you from 1st Jan till 5th Jan there was bleeding. So you will tell on 1st Jan new menstrual cycle started. Understood? Now see here, only one ovum is released during the middle of each menstrual cycle. तो एक menstrual cycle में सिर्फ एक ही ovum release होगा, right? Now the major events of menstrual cycle are menstrual phase, follicular phase, ovulatory phase and luteal phase, right? So मैंने आपको follicular phase बताया था, luteal phase बताई, ये दो very important नाम है. So in follicular phase, जब follicular phase है, उस वक्त during follicular phase, from here to here it is follicular phase. So follicular phase के जो starting days में जो bleeding होगी, वो days को हम कहते हैं menstruation और menstrual phase. So this phase is called as menstrual phase. फेस साइकिल नहीं, मेंस्ट्रुअल फेस, मेंस्ट्रुअल साइकिल नहीं बोल रहा हूं मैं. सो मेंस्ट्रुअल फेस क्या है? पूरे फॉलिकुलर फेस में जो स्टार्टिंग 5 डेज में जो ब्लीडिंग होती है वो फेस को हम कहते हैं मेंस्ट्रुअल फेस. अंडरस्टूड? अंडरस्टूड. नाउ वी विल कंटिन्यू द होल स्टोरी, वी विल रीड द स्लाइड्स. मैंने सारी स्टोरी आपको समझाई है. ओके, नाउ सी हियर. फर्स्ट व्हाट हैपेंस, we can see here. So the cycle starts with menstrual phase when the menstruation flow occurs. So जिस दिन menstruation होगा उस दिन नया cycle शुरू हो गया है. It lasts for 2 to 5 days. थोड़ी जगह 3 to 5 days है, थोड़ी जगह less than 8 days है. Okay. Now uterine events. Uterus में क्या होगा? In this phase there is breakdown of endometrium. मैंने बताया था starting में there will be bleeding, there will be breakdown of endometrium lining and it blood vessels. राइट. सो एंडोमेट्रियम और उसके सारे ब्लड वेसल्स गिर जाएंगे. वही क्यों होता है? दिस इज ड्यू टू एब्सेंस ऑफ प्रोजेस्टेरॉन हार्मोन. ये होता है क्योंकि प्रोजेस्टेरॉन हार्मोन के लेवल्स कम है. अंडरस्टूड. देन ओवेरियन इवेंट्स. ओवरी में क्या होगा? इन दिस फेज प्राइमरी फॉलिकल स्टार्ट मैच्योरिंग एंड डेवलपिंग इन द ओवरी. सो मैंने आपको बताया था, राइट. सो व्हेन follicular phase is happening at the time of menstrual phase, you can see that the follicles are developing. क्यों डेवलप होते हैं फॉलिकल्स? बिकॉज ऑफ एफएसएच, right, because of FSH. Then the menstrual flow continues of the endometrium, blood secretions and unfertilized ovum. तो menstrual flow के अंदर जो blood है, जो bleeding हो रही है, इस उसके अंदर क्या क्या होता है? उसके अंदर एंडोमेट्रियम होता है, ब्लड होता है, सेक्रीशंस होते हैं और अनफर्टिलाइज्ड ओवम भी बाहर आ जाता है. Then there is proliferative phase और follicular phase. प्रोलिफरेटिव फेस और फॉलिकुलर फेस. इसमें क्या होता है? यूटेराइन इवेंट्स. यूटेराइन इवेंट्स में क्या होता है? देयर विल बी प्रोलिफरेशन ऑफ एंडोमेट्रियम और रीजनरेशन ऑफ एंडोमेट्रियम, right? So there will be regeneration of endometrium, because of which there will be increase in thickness of endometrium. So the thickness of endometrium will increase. Then ovary में क्या होगा दोस्तों? In this phase the primary follicle will mature and it will become fully mature Graafian follicle. तो पूरे follicular phase में the primary follicle will become it will develop and it will become Graafian follicle. Understood? Then what will happen to the pituitary hormones? I already told you the story. So FS and LHH will increase during this phase, which causes follicular development as well as secretion of estrogen by the growing follicles. तो ये क्या बोल रहा है कि ये फेज के अंदर FSH और LH इंक्रीज होंगे, जिनकी वजह से ईस्ट्रोजन भी इंक्रीज होगा एंड देयर विल बी डेवलपमेंट ऑफ फॉलिकल्स. ये सारी स्टोरी मैंने आपको बता दी है. स्लाइड्स में ऊपर नीचे है, स्लाइड्स में ऊपर नीचे, बट मैंने सारी स्टोरी आपको इतना खुल के एक्सप्लेन किया है कि इट इज एनफ. बहुत सारे और भी हार्मोन्स हैं जिनका मैंने नाम नहीं लिया. देयर इज इनहिबिन ए, देयर इज इनहिबिन बी, लेकिन ये आपको पढ़ने की जरूरत इस वक्त नहीं है. व्हेन यू कम टू एमबीबीएस यू स्टडी. अंडरस्टूड. देन देयर इज ओव्यूलेटरी फेज. आई ऑलरेडी टोल्ड यू व्हाट हैपेंस इन ओव्यूलेटरी फेज. सो द estrogen will bring LH surge. This LH surge will bring ovulation. This LH surge will bring ovulation. And this ovulation, if the cycle is of 28 days, this ovulation will be on the 14th day. Understood? So आप देख सकते हैं. So LH, there will be LH surge which induces rupture of Graafian follicle and thereby releases the ovum. So ovum release होगा and this is called as what? Ovulation. Right? Then there will be luteal phase or secretory phase. What will happen in this? The remaining Graafian follicle will transform into corpus luteum. तो जो बचा हुआ ग्राफिन फॉलिकल था वो कार्पस लुटियम हो जाएगा एंड दिस कार्पस लुटियम विल सेक्रेट लार्ज अमाउंट ऑफ प्रोजेस्टेरॉन, जैसे कि मैंने आपको बताया था. सो क्या होगा? द प्रोजेस्टेरॉन सेक्रेटेड फ्रॉम कार्पस लुटियम. सो जो कार्पस लुटियम से जो प्रोजेस्टेरॉन आ रहा है हेल्प्स इन मेंटेनेंस ऑफ एंडोमेट्रियल थिकनिंग. तो एंडोमेट्रियम के जो थिकनेस है उसको मेंटेन करेगा, राइट. Now what will happen? Such an endometrium is necessary. तो ये thick endometrium is very important. क्यों important है? It is necessary for implantation of fertilized ovum. तो मैंने आपको बताया था, right? And the events of pregnancy. तो सारी pregnancy, development of fetus, development of embryo, ये सब होता है after implantation in the endometrium. So endometrium is very very important, right? Therefore progesterone is called as pregnancy hormone. Understood? Now what will happen in the absence of menstruation? अगर menstruation यानी कि bleeding नहीं हुआ, in absence of menstruation, ब्लीडिंग नहीं हुआ ड्यूरिंग प्रेगनेंसी के टाइम पे ब्लीडिंग नहीं होती, इंडिकेट्स दैट द मेंस्ट्रुएशन ओनली अकर्स इफ द रिलीज्ड ओवम इज नॉट फर्टिलाइज्ड। इसका मतलब ये क्या बोल रहा है, जो प्रेगनेंसी में है देयर विल बी नो ब्लीडिंग, मेंसेस नहीं होते। तो मेंसेस नहीं होते इसका मतलब क्या है, अगर मेंसेस तभी होते हैं जब ओवम फर्टिलाइज नहीं हुआ। सो इफ द ओवम इज नॉट फर्टिलाइज ओनली एट दैट टाइम देयर विल बी मेंसेस। अगर ओवम फर्टिलाइज्ड हुआ, अगर प्रेगनेंसी हुई, देयर विल बी नो मेंसेस। सो इन एब्सेंस ऑफ फर्टिलाइजेशन कार्पस लुटियम डीजनरेट्स। अगर फर्टिलाइजेशन नहीं हुआ, कार्पस लुटियम विल डीजनरेट एंड इट इज कन्वर्टेड टू अ व्हाइट बॉडी called as corpus albicans. It is converted to corpus albicans. Right, now this, because the corpus luteum is degenerating, there will be no progesterone. Because there is no progesterone, what will happen, this causes disintegration and rupturing of endometrium, leading to menstruation that marks the menstrual cycle of next month. So जिस दिन bleeding होगी उस दिन नया menstrual cycle शुरू हो गया है। Understood? सो दिस इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट दोस्तों। तो सारा मेंस्ट्रुअल साइकिल मैंने आपको समझाया है। यू कैन सी इन ऑल दीज पेजेस, इन ऑल दीज डायग्राम्स आई हैव एक्सप्लेन्ड यू, एंड प्लीज गिव फीडबैक कि आपको मेंस्ट्रुअल साइकिल समझ में आया या नहीं। अगर अच्छा है वीडियो तो आपके लोगों को भी शेयर करिए। अंडरस्टूड? सो ओके।